Now that all subclasses have been upgraded to the 3.0 standard, it's natural for the community to begin discussing which subclasses received the most love and which ones were left with lackluster updates. If you guys didn't see my video last week already, we released an updated tier list video ranking every single subclass inside of PvE. There were two solar subclasses that stood atop the S tier, those being the Well of Radiance Warlock and Bonkhammer Titan. After releasing this tier list, however, Loreley Splendor received a 37.5% nerf to its healing capabilities inside of PvE, taking its critical sunspots down from Restoration ×2 to Restoration ×1. Today, I'll be showcasing an Unkillable Solar Warlock build that gives you pre-nerf Loreley levels of healing with almost 100% uptime. It allows you to survive things that are going to blow your mind. I'm Above, and if you guys enjoyed today's video, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Now, let's get into it. As we dive into our Unkillable Solar Warlock build, I want to make one thing extremely clear. This build doesn't rely on a single exotic armor piece to make it shine. The roots of this subclass are so good, it will thrive with various playstyles, whether you're using things like Luna Faction Boots, Phoenix Protocol, Boots of the Assembler, or Transversive Steps. They're all amazing options for this subclass, and no matter what your playstyle is, you're going to be able to use those exotics' passive benefits and pair it with such a strong subclass neutral game, it's going to blow your mind. One thing that's at the center of this subclass is Well of Radiance. It's my main driver of my S+ tier grade for the Solar 3.0 Warlock. As I'm sure you guys know, this doesn't need much explaining. It's a god tier super pretty much anywhere inside of PvE and excels even more in endgame content. As we move on to our abilities, the first one of note is Celestial Fire. Celestial Fire is a surprisingly strong melee that has a ranged element to it that's actually super useful inside of PvE. It's going to tie well into our aspects and fragments that we'll be getting into later in the video. As for our grenade ability, most people tend to lean on fusion nades. They're great for damage, feeding your super energy, and just nuking majors inside of PvE. With that said, today's build will be revolving around the healing grenade. It applies a curing effect to both you and your allies when you run through it and gives you restoration for a short period of time. We'll be pairing this with some incredible aspects and fragments that are going to make this even stronger than what you see here. As we dive into our aspects, the first and most important is Touch of Flame. Warlocks are typically regarded as the grenade characters, and Touch of Flame centers around improving your grenade effects. This became extremely popular with the fusion grenade meta because it allowed them to detonate twice instead of the single explosion. Now with healing grenades, you normally just get Restoration ×1, but with Touch of Flame, it allows you to proc Restoration ×2, which essentially doubles the effectiveness of your healing grenade. As you guys can see in this side-by-side comparison, the left POV does not have Touch of Flame, whereas the right POV does. You'll see that the left POV has Restoration ×1 and is having difficulty keeping up with the incoming damage in this 1570 loss sector, whereas the right POV features Touch of Flame and Restoration ×2, and it's pretty much out healing everything that this loss sector is throwing at us with ease. The second aspect on this subclass isn't nearly as important, it's totally personal preference, but I went with Icarus Dash simply for improved movement and fun factor. You can go with something like Heat Rises as well, but I'm not a huge fan of being airborne in endgame PvE content. I feel like it makes you a sitting duck for enemies, so I can't recommend this one personally. As we dive into our fragments, this is where our Unkillable build really starts to come to life. First up, we have Ember of Torches, which allows our powered melee attack to make both you and nearby allies radiant. And for those of you who aren't familiar, this is a 25% damage bonus inside of PvE. This pairs extremely well with Celestial Fire because you don't have to be up in the face of enemies to proc this damage buff, which makes it extremely safe and allows your flow of combat to be extremely easy to use when you're pairing both radiant and curing effects together. This is the perfect segue into our next fragment, Ember of Solace, which gives your radiant and restoration effects increased duration. So we not only have a super consistent way of proccing our restoration with our own healing grenade, we also have a very reliable source of radiant that is safe for both you and your allies even in underleveled content. With Ember of Solace, both of these get extended, which makes this a must-have fragment. Next up, we have Ember of of the Empyrean, and this is where the build gets taken to the next level. Ember of Empyrean states that solar weapon or ability final blows extend the duration of restoration and radiant effects applied to you, which means as we slay out with our various solar weapons or abilities, we're going to continue to extend those radiant and restoration buffs over and over and over again. Now you're probably thinking, above, this is relatively niche since you have to have solar weapons equipped, but I'd argue that some of the best add clear weapons in the game tend to be solar affinity. We have things like Callus Mini Tool and the newly updated BXR Battler, both of which can roll with Incandescent to push our solar build even further ahead. We also have the new Kingsfall Hand Cannon Zaoli's Bane, which has some insane perk combinations, and we also have top-notch exotics like Tiku's Divination and Sunshot in the energy slot. Not to mention Galahorn, Xenophage, and Cataclysmic, all of which are top options in the heavy slot as well. Lastly, we have Ember of Char, where Solar Ignition spreads Scorch to affected targets, and this is great because a lot of solar weapons are able to apply these effects, and it just makes them even more potent. You also get the benefit of plus 10 Discipline, which I think is really important for this build to make sure we have our Restoration Grenade available to us as often as possible. As I mentioned earlier in the video, there's no one exotic that is required to make this subclass shine. The neutral game is so strong that depending on your playstyle, you can play this subclass a variety of different ways. First up, we have Phoenix Protocol, which allows you to use this super in a very aggressive manner. Throw down your well, clear some ads, and get 50% of your super refunded to you depending on how many kills you get, which I think is a great benefit to have because you essentially can spec into 0 intellect and still have your super up all the time. Next up, we have Boots of the Assembler, which allows you to send either noble healing rifts or noble empowering rifts to your allies. So you're either providing them with constant healing or a constant damage bonus depending on how you and your fire team want to play. This is an interesting option because your personal survivability and damage output is never really in question. We're pretty much unkillable even in under-leveled content, so the more we can buff our teammates, the better. Next up, we have Lunafaction Boots, which are fantastic for pretty much any DPS setting. Increasing your reload is never a bad thing, and seeing that this subclass is already so strong, we don't really need any other exotic benefits. The fact that we get an increased reload speed for both you and your fire team is an extremely nice benefit to have in any raid that you guys go into. Transversive Steps are a fantastic option for solo play because the less you have to reload means the more you can keep your radiant and healing stacks up, which means you're going to be unkillable even longer. We also have Aeons that you can use in a team setting to generate ammo for your fire team if you guys need it, and you can even use something like Eye of Another World to reduce the cooldowns of all of your abilities depending on how your stat distributions are looking. This could be a solid option. As we dive into armor mods, the main focus here was to improve the subclass's neutral game benefits. They're already incredibly strong, so if we can take them a step further, this subclass goes absolutely crazy in endgame content. First up, we have Explosive Wellmaker, where rapidly defeating combatants with explosive damage spawns a solar elemental well. Weapons like Galahorn, Sunshot, and any incandescent weapon will be doing this constantly, which means solar wells will be flowing faster than you can even pick them up. We'll be pairing this with Font of Might, where picking up an elemental well that matches your subclass energy type grants a temporary bonus to weapon damage of that same element. So, as you slay out with Sunshot or any other solar weapon of your choice, you'll be generating elemental wells, which will give you Font of Might, which will allow you to generate wells even faster because you'll be doing more damage. And the great thing about Font of Might is that it stacks with Radiant, which means you'll have a 50% damage bonus available to you pretty much at all times. Next, we have Well of Life, where picking up a solar elemental well grants increased regeneration for a short period of time. This mod acts purely as a fail-safe guard in case your restoration falls off in the middle of combat. When you pick up an elemental well, it'll give you that increased regeneration that will get you through until your grenade is available to you once again, which will allow you to start the gameplay loop over where you're just slaying out ads and healing constantly. The last elemental well mod that I'll be talking about today is Seeking Wells, which allow elemental wells to move towards your current position. This is super useful when you're doing ad clear because you don't always want to have to track down the elemental wells that you're generating, so if they track towards you, you're going to be getting that Font of Might and additional healing whenever you need it. On the helmet, I ran Inferno Whip. This is a great Unstoppable Champion mod this season for just 2 points, and I also used Harmonic Siphon, where rapid weapon final blows with damage that matches my subclass type, aka every weapon we've been using in this video, will generate an Orb of Power. And we can pair this with Invigoration, where picking up an Orb of Power will reduce our melee cooldown, which means we don't really have to spec into Strength all that much, because we'll be generating not only elemental wells like crazy, we'll also be generating Orbs of Power, which will allow us to reduce our melee cooldown constantly as we pick those orbs up. And this will also be feeding our super energy like crazy, because with something like Phoenix Protocol, we already get 50% of it back, and then we're also generating orbs at an astounding rate. On the gauntlets, I went with Impact Induction because causing damage with a melee attack will reduce your grenade cooldown. So like I said earlier, this is another failsafe mod where, say your restoration falls off or you mistime your grenade, you can use your melee to proc Radiant and reduce the cooldown of your next healing grenade even more. And we'll also be pairing this with Double Bomber on the class item, which reduces grenade cooldown when using your class ability. The Restoration Nade cooldown is just 31 seconds at tier 10 Discipline. When you pair this with the fact that your Restoration Grenade effects last for 5 seconds, and you usually get at least 1 to 2 kills if you're using it correctly, you're looking at just 20 seconds between grenades. Now, if you pair this with Double Bomber and Impact Induction, that timer between grenades becomes more like 10 seconds instead of 30, and that's assuming you only extend your restoration effects once or twice each time you use your grenade. More often than not, I found that I had my restoration grenade in my pocket, and I still had my restoration and radiant timers extended by the time my grenade became available, meaning restoration is available to me at all times, which allows me to play the ultimate aggressive support warlock that I've always dreamed of. Well guys, that pretty much does it for the video today. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. If there are any other builds that have piqued your interest this season, definitely let me know down in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.